Hey everybody, so I got a question from one of my viewers wanting to know what Berkeley was like in the early 2000s. I was there from 2002 to 2006 and wanting to know what it was like, especially because this was before a lot of the changes to the music industry that we are now experiencing, like streaming services and things like that, went into place. And so that's a question I'm happy to answer. And to be clear, I am talking about Berklee, the music school in Boston, not UC Berkeley out in California. So anyway, I went to Berklee, like I said, from 2002 to 2006. I majored in professional music, and I was a guitar principal. And it was, for me personally, it was the best time in my life, not just because college is very often, the best time in a lot of people's lives, but because uniquely it was a place, the place where for the first time in my life, I really and truly knew what it was like to be among my people and to be in a place where everybody spoke the same intellectual language of music and everything. And this was a place where, I mean, you could literally sit down over drinks with a beautiful woman and talk about Dream Theater. And not just because it's me trying to tell her about how great Dream Theater is, it's because she's already a fan of it, coming to the conversation. She's already a fan of Dream Theater. It's like that. I mean, it was extraordinary. All my life, I had been kind of, that kid over there because my interests were always so removed from what everybody else was into. And so for me personally, I know this is not, you had more specific questions about Berklee, but for me, that alone was extraordinary. It was transcendental. And to this day, uh, 20 years later, 20 plus years later, I have never fully grieved and released Berklee and Boston from my heart. And sorry. And Boston is a beautiful city too. It can be really difficult to live there. The people can be very argumentative and very confrontational, and that happened a lot, and yeah, that is not pleasant. But Boston is a beautiful city with a beautiful culture, and certainly very. The whole New England area is very integral to the founding of the United States, so there's a lot of history there and everything. And I loved it there. Absolutely loved it. I cannot even begin to put into words how perfectly I connected with Berkeley and with the culture there. I was in my element. And it literally like I said, like you're in a place for 4 years. I was in a place for 4 years where I finally felt understood. I finally didn't feel like that weird, bizarre, aberrant weirdo kid. I graduated the last 2 years of my high school career. I graduated I went to and graduated from a performing arts high school. Even there, I did not feel like I fit in as well as I did at Berkeley because the climate of what the other kids were into there was very much removed from what I was into. So anyway, uh, that that was great. That part of it was great. You had a very specific question about what the studios were like at Berkeley, and were they analog or digital? They had both. They had analog studios and digital studios, and the digital, a lot of the digital studio equipment was open to anybody because obviously it was fairly small, fairly small and contained, so you could go in to you could go in and rent out some space on a simple DAW, which for the layman is digital audio workstation. You could rent out a DAW and go in a little cubicle size room and record some stuff and that kind of thing. That was pretty easy to do. The production majors, however, were the ones that had access to the actual analog studios, and these were the ones that had the perfect acoustic sculpting. They were meant to recreate like Hollywood sound stages and major A-list recording studios and everything like that. They were the ones, the production majors, specifically the senior upper class production majors, mostly were the ones who had access to those. And so you're asking if they taught analog or digital. Well, they taught both, like I said. And they taught Pro Tools, and they taught how to use Pro Tools and all of that. And Pro Tools was the general, as I recall, Pro Tools was the general DAW of choice. There was kind of like the Mac PC holy war. There was kind of that thing going on among the students between Pro Tools and Logic. I'm very much Team Pro Tools in that discussion. Logic is ridiculous to me. But anyway, and they would have the analog studios, talking about the analog studios though, they would have these, part of the curriculum, each semester they would have projects that the production students would have to do, that were called sound-alike projects. And the idea with a sound-alike was you were given a track, just any track, at your teacher's selection, whatever it was. And you had to go into the studio. You had to hire your classmates, your fellow musicians and everything, and go into the studio and recreate this song, whatever song you'd been given in the studio. And it had to sound using entirely analog acoustic recording equipment. Non-digital analog recording equipment. You had to make it sound exactly like the original recording. And that was so strictly enforced that you were not allowed to use Pro Tools at all, and that was so strictly enforced that production students had to sign an agreement saying not only that they promised not to use Pro Tools, but that they understood if they were caught using Pro Tools, there would be severe penalties, and also that if they saw one of their classmates using Pro Tools on a sound-alike project, they were required to inform on that classmate, and that if they did not, they would again face penalties as well. So that was a pretty significant thing, and understandably so, because even though now most the overwhelming majority of the production, if I'm producing something, again, I was not a production major. I learned mostly from my classmates, and then in the real world, working in different studios and that kind of thing. But even though like now most of what I do is digital, and even if I record a live drummer, it's less likely that I'm going to it's less likely that I'm going to use the drums that were recorded there in the studio. What it's really going to be is I'm going to use I'm going to take the recorded drums and tempo map them, and then assign drum triggers to all of it so that it and then just mix everything from there. So things like that. Even though so much of it is digital now, it's not. Even though so much of it is digital, you still need to have the acoustic understanding of it, and the and then understanding of microphone placement and all of that, especially because all of the digital stuff is set up with the intention of simulating the live room, the live space. So you still need to know how that space functions and how that space operates. Anyway, so then that's one. So that's answering one part of your specific question. Talking about the program itself now, you have to remember when I started, the main thing that I did not get out of the program is out of the Berklee program was how to function in the music world, the music industry now as it exists now. And that's understandable because there was no way to know what was coming. You would need like there's a clip of Jerry Purnell on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder where he's uh, very accurately predicting the future of the internet and the future of book publishing and that sort of thing. A whole lot of things, the very eerie predictions about technology, about where it was going, that proved out to be true. And the reason he's able to do that was because he was someone who just very much had his finger on the pulse of technology, and also, as a science fiction writer, understood the cause and effect, of what was coming. And so we desperately needed someone like that to to very much kind of predict accurately where all of this was going. Because when I was there was no Spotify, there was no Apple Music, there was none of this. We had iTunes, Apple iTunes, but that was still a pay per download store. You were still purchasing individual albums. You were just doing it digitally. And so Berklee, the business aspect of it, and it's funny, the music business courses, which, obviously were not what I was interested in when I was there, are some of the courses that I refer back to the most, just because I have to, being a good, good musician requires being a good artist requires being a good businessman. And so I refer back to those business courses the most. Like right now, one of my endeavors is I'm putting a cover band together, because cover bands are huge in Atlanta. And so I'm trying to, get a piece of that pie. And so, like, I'm thinking back to all of the marketing courses, all of the business courses and financing and all that stuff. And that information is great and not to be undervalued at all. And that's something that you benefit from from studying at Berklee, because Berklee is geared towards how do you function in the modern music world. That is the question that they want you to be able to answer when you leave, as opposed to a more traditional conservatory like Juilliard, where their concept of, as far as what are they going to teach you about music business? Get a job in a conservatory, and here's how you pay your taxes. That's it. So that kind of stuff is really helpful. But you're right that these changes went into place. We see Napster was a thing. The whole Napster controversy with Metallica suing Napster and all of that stuff, that had been up in the air. That was a very recent memory when I was at Berklee. LimeWire was the thing. Everybody was using LimeWire, but even LimeWire and Napster, things like this, those things were really only being used by, nerds and computer nerds and audiophiles and that sort of thing. Your average Joe and Jane music consumer, they were still buying CDs and that sort of thing. So it was very much, there was very much a conservative mindset in terms of the lack of foresight. It was very much the questions that were the dialogue that was being had was, how do we hold on to the old business model, not how do we anticipate what the new business model is going to be. And that was a dialogue that should have been, that latter dialogue really did need to happen, because subscription services and streaming services, once streaming took over and changed everything, that changed the whole music industry. And it's weird because, before you could look at, in the late 90s, what was the late 90s? The thing in the late 90s, nu metal. And before that, alternative, and before that, grunge, and before that, hair metal, and before that, new wave, and before that, punk, and before that, progressive rock, and before that, psychedelic music, and before that, rock and roll, and before that, hard bop, and before that, bebop, and before that, swing. Music would go through these, and then ragtime, all the way back 100 years or more. Music would go through these very specific phases, very specific things would become popular and take off. What's the current thing now? We don't know, because there's no way for any particular style to catch on to such a degree that it corners the market. certain genres like hip hop and hip hop and EDM music do better than others, just because those are genres that can be accomplished entirely in a digital atmosphere with a very limited number of acoustic performers, if you will. Sometimes, in the case of rap, it's just the vocalist and then the producer doing everything in the studio. In the case of EDM, it's just a producer. It's like someone like Dead Mouse sitting in there and literally sketching out his music in the Pro Tools MIDI format and all that. So so those things do better. The reason they do better really is just because there's very little there's very little required for the production budget on those things. Like I said, because they're not going to be using rooms with actual acoustic sculpting. They're not going to have to rent out all of that space. They're not going to have to hire actual musicians, that sort of thing. So they're able to function a little better. But as far as what's actually the thing right now, what era are we in? What era are we in? Like when we were in the grunge era, like when we were in the hair metal era. What era are we in now? No one can really say. And that's very different. And that's part of the problem, was that, one of the things we looked at in Berklee, one of the things they taught us to do was to identify those trends. Like I mentioned, the cover band thing, there's a definite trend here in Atlanta that cover bands are doing really well, especially cover bands with a unique idea, a unique spin to them, like the Yacht Rock Review does really well here, that kind of thing. And the cover band I want to put together, I won't spend time explaining it all right now, but I have an angle on that, so those nuanced, those novelty cover bands are doing really well. And so we were taught to identify trends like that, and I can identify those trends at the local level, but to try to identify those trends at the national level is impossible, or the international level is impossible. I mean, even some of the most popular genres like K-pop is really still a cult phenomenon, just at the cult level phenomenon here in the United States. So that was very different. Back then, we were still thinking of, when we would study songwriting and that sort of thing, we would be taught how to think of, okay, what is the nature of this song in relation to the overall album that you're putting out? We were thinking in terms of album music and how to generate successful album music. That's the business we were trying to go into. And so the questions would be like, how does this song relate to what you're doing with the overall album? What's your focus track? What's your lead-off single? Why is this your lead-off single? Where does that lead-off single go in the track list? What are you going to follow it up with? Do you follow it up with, are you the type of band that, like an 80s metal band, that's going to start with a big, heavy arena opener, followed by the sensitive ballad? And, that's a very obvious example of this kind of marketing and this kind of structuring and that sort of thing. So these questions were always at the forefront. Who is this music for? Why are you writing this? There was a thing that, they would ask you a question, questions like, why did you write it this way? Why did you compose it this way? And you're never allowed to say, because I thought it sounded cool. Because I thought it sounded good, which ultimately is the reason you compose anything in music. But you're never allowed to say that. You had to have a reason for it, a justification, and a direction that you wanted to go with it. So that was, and I would say now, I'm obviously 20 years removed from the program, but I'm wondering, I am curious about how Berklee is preparing students for the modern music world. And to give you an idea, Berklee started out as Schillinger House, and it was to teach the music. It was built around the music theory teaching method of Joseph Schillinger, and this was an approach to studying music, especially the theory behind contemporary music, which at the time was like big band swing jazz, and that's sort of the burgeoning hard bop, ragtime, all of the contemporary styles back in the early half of the 20th century. And it was originally called Schillinger House, and it was to teach that style. And the reason it was built around that style was they were marketing it as, if you come study this style of interpreting music theory, which the Berklee program continues to, is still rooted in that theory method to this day. They said, if you come study this style of teaching and this style of theory and interpreting music theory and all of that, you will have exactly the tools you need to go out into the music world and get a job, get a gig as a working musician. Go play, if you want to go play tenor saxophone in the Charles Mingus Big Band or something like that, this is what you need to study. And so because of that, Berklee, its approach has always been, the approach that Berklee has always taken has always been looking at whatever the new thing is, whatever the new thing in music is, and studying it, breaking it down, figuring out how it works, finding out how do we take our theory method that's rooted in this particular approach, this highly mathematical approach. And if you look at a Berklee chart and lead sheet analysis, it looks like quantum physics equations. It's a very highly mathematical interpretation. And so how do we take that and how do we apply it to whatever the new thing is that's coming out? So rock and roll comes out, they open up to that. Jazz fusion comes out, they open up to that. And, as modal jazz becomes a part of it, when we see, when heavy metal becomes popular in the late 70s, early 80s, and they open to that, and they start looking at with heavy metal, a harmonic palette where you have players like Ritchie Blackmore and then later Kirk Hammett and that sort of thing that are doing blues phrasing in tandem with with classical phrasing and classical harmony, and how do we break that down and that sort of thing. And so because of that, Berklee has always been thought of as the school for contemporary music, and rightly so. What started the dialogue that started to happen, though, while I was there, and one of my favorite teachers of all time while I was at Berklee was in the harmony department, is a guy named Steve Roshinsky. Absolutely, just devastatingly brilliant harmony teacher. Like, we think about the legends in the theoretical mathematicians and everything, the legends of that area, like Stephen Hawking and John Nash. Steve Roshinsky is on that level of understanding of harmony. It's extraordinary. One time he and I were talking, and he told me about that the dialogue that was happening at Berklee among the top brass was, they were saying, well, are we still essentially a trade school that is studying the new innovations in music and teaching people how to be ready to go out into the world, or are we now more a place like MIT where the innovations are happening? And that's a very that's a very reasonable question to be asking. That really there was a lot of experimentalism going on while I was at Berklee, and it was a very experimental atmosphere, and that experimentalism was encouraged. And it was because there was this dialogue around, maybe we are now in a place where we are not just teaching the new thing, we are now guiding the ship, we're now steering the ship. And that's very reasonable, because so many people were there that became industry heavyweights, were there while I was there that became industry heavyweights. The guys that eventually became Imagine Dragons were there while I was there. The young woman who eventually became St. Vincent was there while I was there. I didn't know any of them personally, but there were other ones I knew personally. Eric Andre I knew personally, but yeah, the comedian. and then other people that have gone on to become huge. And I've I've listed those at length. But there were guys there that I know that went on to become huge, and so it's reasonable to think, yeah, this is now where the innovators are coming along. St. Vincent, for example, who I've really gotten into lately. That's a very innovative performer and very innovative persona and creative person and that sort of thing. So that dialogue is going on around it, and because of that, it does create kind of an odd tension among some of the students sometimes, where it's like, well, I'm here to study. I'm here to study trance, EDM, trip hop. Why am I having to study Scott Joplin? That kind of thing. And so consequently, Berklee finds itself like in a strained position where it's like, we are a contemporary music school, but in order for you to apply the musical principles that we're going to teach you, we need you to go back 100 years and look at Scott Joplin and look at Duke Ellington and all of this stuff. So that's a little bit about it there, about how the program has evolved. There have been a few decisions that were made, major decisions about Berklee that were made that I didn't agree with, that have happened since I was there that I didn't agree with. Like, one is that they purchased Boston Conservatory, and Boston Conservatory, BOCO we called it, is a more traditional arts conservatory like Juilliard, which was just up the road from us. And that's where they taught more traditional classical conservatory style harmony and theory and that sort of thing. And on top of that, they had theater and arts and all other artistic mediums there and that sort of thing. Berklee purchased Boston Conservatory, or merged with it. I'm really not crazy about that decision, just because I do think Berklee should be just music. I think that, like speaking to my own experience of, like, I went to a performing arts high school, and while I was there, it was obviously a school with limited resources, and so it was every discipline: dance, music, theater, all that. Everybody was vying for the limited resources that were available, and I don't want, even though Berklee has more resources, I still don't want a situation like that. I want music students to be able to go there and have unlimited access to the resources, rather than having to share with the, further diversify beyond what Berklee is structurally set up to be able to do. So that's something I don't agree with. I was there when Roger Brown became president. I knew him personally, mainly because I saw him after he became president. I saw him in the hall one day, and I said, "Hey, you're that new kid?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And we started talking. Really nice guy, very friendly, very approachable, and and he would listen. Like, walked up to him one day and he said, "Hey, Robert, I just got to tell you, the Fender Deluxe Reverb Twin is the suckiest, shittiest amplifier that has ever existed. Please get it out of the classrooms." And I think I recommended Line 6 or something like that at the time. And he's like, "Okay, I'm on it." We never did, but he was willing to listen. Anyway, he was a good guy, and he did he had a good run. I know he's retiring now, but he had a good run as president, and he did a lot of good stuff. And he was very involved with the students, and always involved with getting the students involved in the dialogue there and everything, which is great. So, and then also the other thing is that I was uniquely privileged, to go to college before the whole woke thing took over, before everything became woke, before we had before there was this constant kind of neo-McCarthyist feeling of looking over your shoulder and making sure you never said the wrong thing. It was a more open and, dialogue-friendly environment, if you will, a more apolitical environment. Also because, you're shelling out a ton of money to study music that, you're not going to fuck around there. So there were not a lot of people that were like trying to become young revolutionaries because they had no idea what they wanted to do with their lives. That thing was not there. Uh, there's one guy there. There's one kid there that was a Scientologist and was always trying to recruit people. That was really annoying. But anyway, so to talk about my actual education, while I was there, so studying guitar, when I started, I learned about Berklee because of John Petrucci, because John Petrucci from Dream Theater went there, and Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater went there, and John Myung and all of that. And so when I found that out, I was interested. Then when I found out Steve Vai went there, I was insanely interested. And then I started finding out that, like, so many of the people that I worshipped in the music world were connected to this school. So it became the only place in the world I wanted to go, and for college. And my first guitar instructor there, I went there with the intention of, I had certain teachers that I absolutely wanted to work with. And the number one private instructor I wanted to have was John Finn. John Finn is an amazing teacher. By my fourth semester, I finally got him as my private instructor, and I stayed with him until I graduated. It was absolutely amazing. Go listen. He has an album, John Finn, Finn, has the John Finn group. Go on streaming services, look him up. His album, Don't Look So Serious, is extraordinary. So is Wicked. Those two albums I just fell in love with, absolutely fell in love with. But I went to Berklee knowing that I wanted to study with him. Another person that I wanted to study with very much so was Joe Stump. And when my first experience at Berklee was before I was a student there. I went to the summer guitar camp, summer of 2001, and so that was where I got to have some limited interaction with Joe Stump, with John Finn, with all these guys. Joe Stump was the heavy metal guy at Berklee, and so he was my first. He was my first teacher when I was a proper student there, the first private instructor I had. Really cool guy, and he does the Yngwie Malmsteen neoclassical style of guitar playing infinitely better than Yngwie. Like, I'm serious. I'm not saying that lightly. I really do prefer him for that style to Yngwie, even though he's considered considered kind of a parallel of Yngwie's. And Joe is a real character. If I say 80s metal guitarist, the image that just flashed in your head, that is how Joe dresses for class every day. And go look him up right now and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. He's an amazing guitarist, amazing shred guitarist. He's now in Alcatraz, which is a perfect position for him to be in. But yeah, really cool guy, really amazing guitarist. I had a blast with him. The next private instructor I had was a guy named Sean Michaud. Sean is a really killer guitarist, and very much more, where Joe is in the neoclassical vein, Sean is in the vein of, Steve Vai and John Petrucci, and I learned so much from Sean. Jason Becker, Jason Becker, John Petrucci, Steve Vai, these are my favorite guitarists, and so I learned a lot from Sean, and Sean really knew the ins and the outs of John Petrucci, for example, the ins and the outs of how he does his solos, taught me a lot about parallel soloing and octave shifting and that kind of thing, which are techniques that John Petrucci uses constantly in his solos, and consequently I use them constantly in my solos. But anyway, so Sean was amazing, and then I went back and forth with them for the first 2 years that I was there, and then the last 2 years I did the entire thing with John Finn, and John was my Mr. Miyagi. Oh my God! In fact, I I was buying lots of pins at Newberry Comics, and I gave him a Mr. Miyagi pin at the end of one semester as a gift. Amazing dude, totally amazing, and changed the way I think about guitar, but also changed the way I think about life. I mean, just extraordinary experiences. So that was, so that's a little bit of that. And then again, I mentioned Steve Rashinsky in the harmony department, which was incredible. And it was an absolutely amazing experience. Obviously shaped who I am and who I was and who I became. I miss it every day of my life. And I wish I could, I have had, put it to you like this, I've had dreams where, I have had dreams where I have decided to take out a massive, I don't know how much it cost now, it was $30,000 a semester when I was there, but like a massive $50,000-$60,000 loan or something, so that I can go back and study for another year at Berklee. To this day, I have dreams that I'm doing that. And that should give you an idea of how impactful it was on me and how amazing it was. And, is it worth $120,000 to have that experience? I can't make that decision for you. It is a lot to take on, and it's an even more chancier burden to take on. The student loans are an even more chancier burden to take on now, in a world where the music industry is so completely destabilized. They may have a new model, a new business model at Berklee that they're teaching to the kids now. It may be there. I don't know. What I do know is the business model I learned does not exist anymore. So I don't know. I don't know if I could say to you, I can truthfully say to you that whatever style of music you want to go into, you will be able to go to Berklee and come out a master of that style. I can truthfully say that to you. What I cannot truthfully, with certainty, say to you is that you will know you will have the necessary knowledge to capitalize on your mastery of that style. So that's the question I cannot answer. And like I said, though, the experience was one of the best, probably the best 4 years of my life without question. And so, like I says, very intense program. You are not there to fuck around. It is a very intense program. And I can remember, I give you, my first experience that the first thing I did when I got to Berklee, day one, the first thing that happened was I had an ensemble class directed by Ken Zambello. He was the director. And so so you go in and you sit down, and literally it was 2 guitars and a drummer and a keyboardist and a vocalist. And we sit down, and it's like, if you've seen Whiplash, it's like that room, only the layout is guitars, not, and rock band equipment, not a big band ensemble. And also Ken Zambello is a very nice, very kind, very warm-hearted, friendly individual, and absolutely nothing like the J.K. Simmons character in Whiplash, but aesthetically it was much the same. And you sit down in that room, and they dropped a chart in front of me, and to this day I remember what the chart was. It was Alone, the song Alone by Heart. How do I get you alone? That one. They dropped it in front of me, and me and the other guitar player, I remember, is a guy named Jeremy. He's a nice guy. He's a badass death metal became a badass death metal guitarist, and he had a band called Scourge. I remember, it's a really good death metal band called Scourge. I don't know if they're still around, but anyway, I know he got endorsed by Jackson Guitars for a while, but anyway, side note, but that chart drops in front of me, and it was literally just sight reading this chart and go. And that was my first experience. And I did it. I got all the way through the chart. I remember that. I remember getting all the way through the chart. And it's not the hardest song in the world, but even so, I got through the chart and I was like, breathe a sigh of relief. And I remember Jeremy saying like, you know how to solo, man, you solo. And so I got the lead just because of that. And, that intensity never let up for 4 years. I mean, it is rigorous to say the least. And, so that experience, I can remember times when, the thing of like, the practice rooms were in the basements of the dorms. Well, the Mass Ave dorm, the practice rooms were adjacent to the dorm rooms, but in all the rest of in the Commonwealth dorm and the Hemingway dorm, which I was in Commonwealth my first year and Hemingway the rest of the time. The practice rooms were down in the basement, and I can remember things where like you go down at night to practice and you come up and it's dawn, that kind of thing. And that, I mean, it was, like I keep saying, it was intense. It was rigorous, and I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding, man. And, and on top of that, you get to lug a guitar case in the snow, and I was obsessed at the time. I had to have a Floyd Rose on my guitar, even though nowadays I almost never have a reason to use a whammy bar. But I had to have a Floyd Rose on my guitar because that's what Steve Vai had, that kind of thing. And so because of that, I will not put a guitar with a Floyd Rose into a soft shell case. Because I've actually destroyed a Floyd guitar with a Floyd Rose system because it was in a soft shell case. In fact, that very guitar is right here, and you can see now I've pulled off several pieces of the Floyd Rose to use it as spare parts on other guitars, but you can see the damage that thing endured, and how busted up it is up here and everything. This was an amazing guitar. Anyway. And because anytime I bust out a guitar, somebody asks you, how many guitars do you have? And right now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 just in this room with me. But anyway, so but anyway, yeah, what was I talking about? Because carrying my guitar in the snow, yeah, so I had to carry like big, heavy, soft shell cases like these guys and everything in the snow. So, and then, like I said, Boston, on top of that, Boston, is like just a wonderful town. If you're a creative person, though, it's a really wonderful town. And I'll tell you, like, one of the things that you missed, that I got, that you and the younger generation will miss out on, is video stores. I love, Boston had all of these little, like, niche video stores that had all this cool underground cinema and foreign movies and everything, and all the weird stuff, and all that. And I loved just going through them. I'm a huge film buff, and so I just loved going through all of that. All that stuff and everything, and finding like weird movies, and that's how I discovered like some of my favorite auteur directors and people you've never heard of, like Radley Metzger and that kind of thing. And anyway, an incredible experience. You will come out of it knowing music better than any other way possible, or in any other methodology possible. You will. I truly do believe the Schillinger method has the proof is in the pudding. I mean, look at the extraordinary list of people that have come from Berklee, and contemporary musicians that have come from Berklee. And so I do think that it built on it's built on a really phenomenal foundation. You will come away with it with a mastery of music and a mastery of your instrument. And there was a time when I could have told you would come away from it with a mastery of the music business. but I can't say for certain that that is the case anymore, and I don't think anybody can, because we are in a post-apocalyptic wasteland as far as how the music industry works now. Hardly anybody knows, nobody really knows how to capitalize on the current thing. I joke that, like, I joked on a forum, an alumni forum, I think, somewhere one time, that if Berklee wants to teach people how to succeed in the music industry now, they're going to have to start teaching them how to sell, market, how to create and market their own signature wine and their own signature craft beer and all this shit, because it's like tie-in products are what's making money now, you know. It's kind of like, I went to a Pat Metheny clinic one time, and they were asking, they said, Pat, what do you think about what do you think about what free downloads and piracy and all that is doing to live music? And he said, or is doing to music and doing to the music industry. And he said, well, the thing they'll never be able to take away from us is the live performance. And the live performance will never go away. And then he said, and the other thing that will never go away is t-shirts. And that's basically it now. I mean, if you want to make money in the music business, you're a t-shirt salesman at the end of the day. So anyway, that's a little bit of insight into the where, when, why, and how of Berklee, my experience there and everything. Fun question. I like answering stuff like that. Peace.